Welcome all, and thanks for joining us. I'm going to be presenting on this, the Design Manual for Urban Roads and Streets. This is the 2019 version I'll be working off. It was out in 2012. It's being updated all the time, and there's a website dedicated to it. There's a case studies on it. It's not just the manual, and there's links to all kinds of different documents on the urban infrastructure. So just by way of introduction, I'll just take a step back and let me see. Okay, sorry. Right, so this is where it began for me. This is a crossing just near my estate in Ballincollig, and it leads down to the Ballincollig Regional Park. On the left-hand side, there's a heap of estates serving hundreds of homes, thousands of people, and they are all funneled down to this crossing point, and this is what they have to cross to get to the regional park. There's a 1 meter wide concrete slab on the right-hand side called the footpath, and that leads down 100 meters past this busy road to the park. There's no facility whatsoever to cross. There's no. You have to just cross it carefully, and it's the safest feature about it is that it's such a dangerous point that you have to take your time with it. You have to take care. So this is where it all began for me. I have small children, and we often drive to the park, even though it's only about 800 meter walk. But we will drive to the park purely because it's not safe at this crossing point. And there's many other families in my estate that do exactly the same thing. So this is where it all started. I joined the pedestrian network, and I've been educating myself on what should be there, how you can go about improving this, and why it's not like this already. I mean, is there the dmurs manual then is what I've been using to educate myself on it. It's a very detailed document. It covers way more than what I'll cover tonight. I'm going to stick very mostly to the what's directly applies to what we work on the pedestrian network, so footpaths, roadways, but it takes in the whole street environment. So DMUR sets itself up as the practical measures to achieve highly connected, walkable streets, safe and comfortable street environment, attractive and lively communities, calm traffic via a number of design methods. So we'll start off at the beginning from scratch. So you have two pictures here, residential estates, both of them, and there's a completely different feel to the two of them. You can spot the difference. On the left-hand side, you have a long wall which blocks out any entrances and exits. On the right-hand side, you have lots of entrances and exits. On the left-hand side, you have very few people. On the right-hand side, you have lots of people. You have car parking. So there's always the possibility, even if there's not people on the street, there's always the possibility of people coming onto the street suddenly. And then you have the overlooked aspect. So on the left-hand side, you see that there's very few windows looking onto the street. In fact, the houses are faced away from the street, while on the right-hand side, there's heaps of windows looking onto the street. So if you, I would ask you to then look at that in terms of if you're a driver coming onto that street. On the left-hand side, you have very few exits, very few people. You can just go on. You can just go faster. And on the other side, you have to show caution. And as a pedestrian, how do you feel getting onto that? Do you feel comfortable? What if someone appears 100 meters away? Will you feel comfortable passing them? When you're in an isolated space like that, you will not feel comfortable. There's just no way. So this is what DMURS it comes at. We want to get away from our go faster neighborhoods. We want to get into a more livable space. We want to create the environment that will influence the behavior we want. So one learning you can take from this, from these pictures, is that when drivers enter this space, they're influenced by the environment. So on the left-hand side, they'll go faster, and on the right-hand side, they'll go slower. So that's a very significant impact on their behavior. Now, if we actually look at the speeds that a car will go at, I'm sure we've all seen this. At 30 kilometers an hour, 1 in 10 people will die from an impact from a car. By 50 kilometers an hour, you're already talking about a 50% chance of survival only. So that's a very steep curve. In fact, by the time you get to 80 kilometers an hour, you pretty much have no chance to survive an impact. But the 50 kilometer an hour is our default speed limit in our urban area. And what on the right-hand side, then I've taken this from the Road Safety Authority Free Speed Survey. And what they found is that in their survey, 52% of people were speeding in 50 kilometer an hour zones, which is the basic urban speed limit. So really from this, you're kind of thinking that the default should be that it should be 30 kilometers an hour, and that you should have to justify going to higher speeds by making the road safer in some way. But in Ireland, the default is 50, and you have to argue for 30 kilometers an hour. So, but there's an interesting point leading on from the previous slide where I was talking about behavior in the way infrastructure impacts behavior. There's some interesting statistics that came out of the road speed survey. So in 50 kilometer an hour, the average speed is 61 kilometers an hour. So the average speed is speeding, it's excessive. At 100 kilometers an hour, it's more or less the same, it's 96. At 120 kilometers an hour, it's 113 kilometers an hour. So I'm asking, what does that tell you? To me, that tells me that the speed is not set by the speed limit. It doesn't matter what speed limit we put up on our signs, it will be dependent on the environment of the road. So even if we were to advocate for speed limits, our job is only beginning. We have a long way to go. We must make the environment conducive to the behavior we want. So that's behavior of cars, but what about the behaviors of people? If we were to take a step back and look at the pedestrian as an animal in its in natural environment, what would we say about it? You can ask yourself, would this apply to yourself? Pedestrians have little tolerance of delay. They will not comply with detours or diversions, and they tend to follow desire lines, or i.e. take the shortest route. So we have to work with that behavior as well. We must influence the behavior. We cannot control it. The pedestrian will be fighting the pedestrian if we try to control it. We must work with it. So this dmurs lays out a lot of design features which are working to influence speed, influence cars, but also pedestrian behavior. And then to do that, we need to define our streets. We need to think about our streets in a systematic manner. So dmurs will talk about the space and layout of the street, its connectivity and the infrastructure for or against the pedestrian. So in the 3 photos here, you could say, oh, well, there's a simple solution to all of them. On the top right, you have, well, you could just give him an extra bit of footpath. The next guy, you could just say, oh, well, give him allow him to cross at the yellow line. And then on the bottom left, you could say, oh, well, just get rid of that, those signs. But the trouble here is that how much take the man on the road? How much extra? Do you want to give him an extra meter, 2 meters? How wide can the lane be? So all these factors we need to take into account for the crossing with the yellow line. If you actually look at the yellow line, there's actually 3 lanes you must cross between an island to get to the edge, and then you have a slipway to cross. So that's quite a long path. You can see why they wanted you to go the other way. It made life a lot easier for the designers of the traffic light signals. And then you have infrastructure for the lampposts and signage. Well, you need to put them somewhere. So where are you going to put them and what's appropriate? So all that's defined in dmurs. It talks about it in greater detail. Okay, so that's kind of the introduction, and we'll get on now to actually talking about some of this infrastructure. So let's look at our basic footpath, the concrete slab at the edge of the road. If you were to split this up, And again, look at it systematically. You could split it into a strip, a footway, and a verge. The strip here is shown as dining tables on the edge of the strip. It's a division between the public and private space. The footway is the actual thoroughfare for people to move, and the verge then it's quite interesting. That's your border region, and what you want to do with that, you can do quite a lot with that. So the footway itself, if it's just you need to think about what is it serving. Is it a local? Is it a link? Is it an arterial route? This will determine how much space it needs. But at all times, you need to bear in mind that if you were to put in minimum width, 2 wheelchairs, 1.8 meters, that also corresponds with the amount of space needed for 2 people to pass comfortably. If we go back to my very first picture of my crossing, the concrete slab on the right-hand side of the road is only 1 meter wide. It's barely enough for the buggy. And very frequently you will have buggies coming up and down that road. It's just not designed. It's not fit for purpose. So dmurs will detail all that. It gives you different widths for different groupings. And then the footway itself, it should be continuous footway. You should give it pedestrian priority. Try to avoid the undulating footway, the up and downs that are often are often on streets with residential entrances and exits, where the driveway, the footpath, is lowered to the height of the driveway and road. It should be the other way around. My brother-in-law is in a wheelchair, and he will often, in his estate, he will often go on the road instead of using the footpath for this very reason. You can achieve this with vertical deflection, which is just raising the road to the same height as the footway. And on the picture on the right-hand side, you can actually see they have taken care to make the footway and the access point to have the same material. This gives clear indication to a driver entering here that this is a pedestrian priority area. So then going on to the verge. So this is a verge can be different things. It can be basically just as simple as a curb. You could have seating on it. You could have, it can serve a protective function. Here on the right hand side, you see bollards protecting a certain, the build out from illegal parking. The build out, which extends out to the road, out to the carriageway itself, allows pedestrians to look onto the road without having to peek around a van. In this vergeway, you've also got parking provided. The parking can actually be useful because it actually means when you're driving on the carriageway, if there's parking on the side, people could be getting out of their cars, so you have to slow down. So it has a function too. And then you could just use the verge to make it visually appealing, or put your signage and your lights on it. Here you have attractive trees, and they make a very visually appealing street. And the footway here is completely clear. You can see, even though they've packed in quite a lot into the verge. And then the strip, then that's the public-private space. Here it's just shown in the bottom right-hand corner as gardens, clearly defining the footway, clearly defining the private space. And then just a technical point that if you want seating on that, you should be looking at a minimum of 1.2 meters to make that seating comfortable. So into crossings. So crossings can be separated into controlled or uncontrolled crossings. The uncontrolled is a courtesy crossing. Here's an example from Ballincollig. It has, this is a very large courtesy crossing. It actually begins before the junction and extends beyond it. You can see here that the level of the road has been raised to the level of the footway, but you can also see that the material is different between the footway, between the raised part of the road, and between the road itself. So there's actually no priority given here. This is neither the pedestrian nor the car has the priority. It must be essentially negotiated. So you can see the change in material and the use of vertical deflection here is very effective. I know from experience that this works extremely well. You allow a lot of pedestrian use without interfering really with traffic or vice versa. Here is the controlled crossing. It's a signal crossing. This is a Pelican crossing. This is a standard pedestrian crossing. It's also in Ballincollig. It's the first of a sequence of these 4 either signalized or courtesy crossing in a 250-meter section in the town center, and it's very effective at controlling the speed of the cars going through. Yeah, you could discuss. It doesn't state specifically whether you should have raised table or not raised table at these signal crossings. But it does actually say that you should have signal crossings on busy arterial and link streets. Well, that's where it's easier said than done, because here you have an example where you have, like in the previous slide, a courtesy crossing where it works very well in the city centre, and you could say, well, that's a local road, but this centre has an arterial route going right through it. Most of the cars entering here will go straight out the other end. So that divide between what is a link or arterial or local street isn't always so clear. And then there's some technical detail there. 4 meters wide for a toucan crossing. Toucan crossing is basically your standard pedestrian Pelican crossing, but with a bike lane attached. And then pedestrian cycle time, no more than 90 seconds. Remember back to pedestrians don't like delays. They say here 90 seconds is the maximum you can hold pedestrians before you lose control. So just continuing on crossings, you want to align your crossings with desire lines. You don't want to try and corral and control the pedestrian, you want to work with them. So they need to be on normal paths, expected paths for the pedestrian. And this should negate the need for guardrails. It's interesting, there is a place for guardrails, but you need to really prove that it's for a safety purpose, and it's not just a cop-out to control the pedestrians where you want them. Guardrails do have they say clear safety benefit, especially say at schools where you have a large outflow of children onto the public space. It can work quite well in that kind of environment, so they don't rule it out. Then the lower pictures here are actually quite interesting. They've changed, there's a before and after here. So there's 2 islands on the left-hand picture, and they've removed one island to allow a more direct movement across the road. This is kind of interesting to me because those islands I thought can be necessary, but here what they say in dmurs is that this island is really just facilitating a slip road here. On the left-hand side, you can see a slip road immediately in the foreground. And that's only facilitating a slip road, which is just allowing cars to go faster, to take that turn faster. So it really, you need to think about who you're designing for. If you're designing for perfectly healthy adults, then the islands can be used like stepping stones across the river. But if you're designing for, say, families with small children or disabled or whatever, then you need to think what's actually going to create the safe environment. They also detail about that the pedestrian lights are set at a speed of 1.2 meters per second, but actually there's quite a large section of the population that won't actually be able to meet that. So you will need refuge islands to allow people to cross. Next, and then on to corners. Reduce the corner radii improves pedestrian experience because of shorter distance, lower speeds, and increasing the visibility between the pedestrian and the vehicles. So if you were to think about that, here's another example from Ballincollig. So this is Flynn's Road in Ballincollig, and it expands from a 6 meter wide normal carriageway, balloons out to 20 meters. If you're a pedestrian going from right to left, so you're on the right hand side, think about all the traffic you need to keep an eye on. You need to keep an eye on the traffic that's coming over your right shoulder. You need to keep traffic that's crossing the lane, that's going to be to your right and to your front, and then you're going to have to keep an eye on the traffic to your left. So it's a huge scope that you need to keep to control. So this is an uncontrolled crossing. It's extremely wide, and I did actually time it once, and it's like a healthy adult takes 10 seconds to walk across that. That's 10 seconds is a long time to be exposed to that much traffic, and that's going at 2 meters per second, which is well above what the rate that had been, as I said earlier, for the standard rate or the standard speed. These are right. So then this is just some detail about the road, the carriageway itself. We've already seen that width influences the carriageway. So narrow carriageways are one of the best ways to control speed, and reducing driver visibility. Now that might be counterintuitive. Having good driver visibility allows for better stopping time. But what it does is it puts the burden of risk onto the pedestrian. So by reducing the forward visibility, you're putting the burden of risk back onto the driver in addition, together with the pedestrian. So that can be quite counterintuitive, but it actually makes sense. So if you can reduce visibility by having car parking, by having a lot of crossing points, by having people on the road, making it an active street. Yeah, and then some detail on the right about lane widths. So I just put this in just to show you that DMurs has this level of detail if you need it. Yeah. Actually, there was an incident. A second. There was an incident in Ballincollig recently. Bollards were put into the street, and on the Facebook community groups in Ballincollig, there was a lot of people saying, "Oh, it's too narrow now." Well, you can go to DMurs and you can see what the what width you should have for a standard lane. Here it's saying the preferred value for a street is 3 meters to 3.25 meters. That should be sufficient. So it just takes out the arguments. You have this manual to show you what's the expected, or what is the needed carriage width. So yeah, down into shared space. Okay, so shared space. One of the key points about this is that it's shared space when everyone realizes it's shared space. So when drivers enter this space, they must know they're going to be interacting with pedestrians. So one of the best ways to do it is materials. What is the road laid out as? Here you can see it's a lot of brickwork. So that's not a standard tarmac carriageway. So that driver should know that he's interacting with, that it's not a standard roadway. So he's interacting with pedestrians. Here you can see they don't have clearly defined areas. So the child and the parent can move off the main thoroughfare, and then they don't have to jump over a curb or anything. They can use either space, and you must negotiate the space. So materials and finishes are important. Avoid curb lines, minimize vehicle carriageway, and then a technical point, some tactile paving may be required to guide the visually impaired in this sort of space. So this is from Clonakilty in West Cork. I know this well. I'm from that area. So I ask you, where are the speed bumps and guardrails? Well, the point is that you don't need them. at the opening night of the Pedestrian Network, the designer of this actual, of the Clonakilty, Julia Vallone, attended, and she said that her speed bumps were the people themselves. In other words, when you see the people, when you're in their space, you will slow down. You don't need speed bumps. In fact, actually, in the dmurs whole manual, I searched and I could not find any reference to speed bump. There's lots of raised tables, etc., but there's no actual reference to a speed bump. So there's better ways of doing things, and no guardrails, because it's a clearly defined space. You're not corralling people. There's no feeling of restriction. It's a very pleasant environment. So that's the infrastructure I really want to talk about. Demurs talks about a whole heap of other stuff. I'm not going to go into detail on this. This is placemaking. This is about making the street more livable, enclosure, active edge, connectivity, all important stuff. But I'm going to kind of just make you aware that all this is there for you to investigate in your own time. This is more on connectivity, the damage we're doing to our communities by segregating them into or closing them off. We're increasing car dependence, we're removing the active travel element, we're just generally making it less pleasant, a lot more prone to antisocial behavior. Here again, this is Clonakilty. This is there's 2 case studies on the Demurs website. There's Clonakilty and Dunleary, so you can actually look at this. This is taken directly from that case study, so you can. They're very interesting in their own right. So this is of particular interest to me because I grew up, so I know what the alternative to this was. This square used to have a black metal railing all the way around. It was closed off. In the day, it didn't look inviting. At night, it certainly didn't. And it was an exclusive zone. You just stayed away from it. It wasn't pleasant. But by opening it up, it's very interesting. By opening it up, you're actually making it much safer, much more secure. You're bringing people in. Your people are your allies in making it safe for everyone. And what's interesting here is they've actually taken the footpath from across the road and run it directly through the park. So this means that even if you're not going to the park, you're going to be walking through the park, and you are now a passive observer. You're a witness. So your presence alone was going to make it safer. It's very simple but very effective. I know because I know the alternative and what it was before. In fact, this was so inspirational that I kind of was able to implement a little bit of it in my own estate. There's a dark corner in my estate that was only really for drinking, teenage drinking, and there was a narrow gap at the end of it, but it was very claustrophobic, so few people used it. Based on this, I opened it up. I opened the gap way up, cut back a lot of the foliage around it. So now when you enter the space, just like here, when you enter the space, you can see right through. You can see the whole space is clear, and it's a much safer environment, much more people friendly. You're drawing people in, and you're making it just a much safer, more pleasant environment. And then that's basically all I want to present to you. These are really just teasers. We can have nice things. We can make a nice environment. You can see this on the left-hand side. You have an environment, Johnny, for the fit and able. On the right-hand side, it's a very inclusive and inviting environment. Here, another before and after. On the left-hand side, the top left-hand corner is quite interesting. You're thinking, what can you do with this lane? But then if you look at the bottom left-hand corner, you see the after. And it's very interesting because they've put a line right down the middle. So you're creating this, the lanes. So you're creating a space where someone driving into this space knows they're kind of encroaching onto a second lane. There's visual clues here to slow down. You cannot just use this as a rat run. So it's very interesting what you could do with what you would think would be very limited material. And then I'll end here. This is kind of a bit cheeky of me. So the before and after. So this is the first photograph I opened up with on the left-hand side. That crossing is still like that. I'm pursuing it with the local councillor. It's on the agendas. But on the right-hand side is a type of after. So this crossing is there for 20 years. Ballincollig Regional Park is continuing to grow in popularity. So what have they done? They haven't put in a crossing to make it safe for local access to not bring their car down there. They've put in a car park. The red there is the extended car park in Ballincollig Regional Park. So, you know, we can have a nice environment if we design for it, but if we don't design for it, we'll get car parks. So, thank you. That's my presentation.